Thank you. It's good to be here, everybody. I'm going to get right into it because I don't think we have a lot of time. I don't mean time today in the schedule, though that may be true too. I don't think we're working with a lot of time as a country right now. I came here, I was with my two sons this morning. One is 3 years old, one is 1 year old. If they graduate from high school before we've gotten this right, I don't think we have a country left. And so I'm going to get right into it, cut through the political BS, and let's have a real conversation today, okay? We're going to get real today. This is a speech I haven't given before, but looking at the amount of time we have left, we're going to cut through the usual introductions and get into this. We're in the middle of a war right now. We are in the middle of a cold cultural civil war in the United States, and you cannot win a war unless you first know that you're in one. This is not a war between black and white, as the media would teach you to believe. It is not a war between man and woman, or gay and straight, or even Democrat and Republican. It is a war between one side who loves the ideals of this country and the ideals that set this nation into motion, who believes that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, who believes that you get ahead in the United States not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contribution, who believe in the American dream. The idea that you get ahead in the United States with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. Most of us in these countries share our common ideals in common. That is one side of this war. And on the other side, we have a fringe minority that has the current Democrat Party in a chokehold, who believes that your identity is based on your genetics, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation. That if you're black, you're inherently disadvantaged. That if you're white, you're inherently privileged. No matter your economic background or your upbringing, your race, your gender, and your sexuality determine who you are and what you can achieve in life. It believes we must flog ourselves for our success in this country, bending the knee to this new cult of climate change, that we have to stop carbon emissions here in the United States, even as we're perfectly fine shifting those carbon emissions to places like China, who will say that it is racist to defend our own border with our own military, but is perfectly fine sending our own military to defend somebody else's border halfway around the world, who believes in group quotas over meritocracy. You see, these two sides of this war, why is this a war? Because those two worldviews cannot coexist. It's not a choice that you can have a little bit of both. It's either one or the other. You're either pro-American or you're anti-American. That is the choice we face in this moment. This is America's time for choosing once again. And I have some good news for you on this war. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is, I'm convinced of this from traveling the country. I have been to a majority of states. There's no social media algorithms in the room between us today. There's no TV screens between us. The media will teach you one thing, but put that to one side. What I see when I travel this country is that most of us, 80+% of this country easily, black or white, even Democrat or Republican, 80+% of this country agrees on our shared national values. A majority of us are on the side of standing for the United States of America without apologizing for it. That's the good news. The bad news is that the other side is still winning. And so the question really for us to answer today is why? Here's what happened in our country. First thing that happened is we had a culture of fear that spread across the United States like an epidemic, faster than COVID-19, okay? This spread, the true pandemic in this country and in the modern West was the spread of this culture of fear. Take the likes of Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of the Squad, who famously said a couple of years ago, "We don't want any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice," end quote. Think about that for a second. When your race goes from being about your skin color to being about the content of the ideas you're allowed to espouse, then any disagreement with those ideas automatically makes you a racist, or a climate denier, or a transphobe, or a homophobe. And there is no greater damnation in modern America than to be called a racist or a climate denier. So when given the choice between pledging allegiance to this new religion and being tarred with that scarlet R, everyday Americans are choosing to bend the knee. And that is what has created this new culture of fear in our country. Fear of losing your job. Fear of your kids getting a bad grade in school. Fear of becoming an outcast in your own community. And that culture of fear has displaced our culture of free speech in the United States of America. You want to know the best measure of our country's health? Is it the number of green pieces of paper in our bank accounts? That's important, but it's not the most important thing. Is it the number of ballots we cast every November? That's just the final act at the end of the process. The best measure of the health of our constitutional republic is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. That's the truth. Right now we are doing poorly. The only way we're going to do better is all of us, not just me, all of us starting to speak openly again. But that's the first reason why the other side is winning. The division is artificial. 80% of us agree on the basic values, and half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We can bring them along too. But the first problem we face is that culture of fear in the United States that created the artifice of division, which allows the ruling party to actually exercise power, dominion, control, and punishment. Now the question is, how did this fringe philosophy, this anti-Americanism, go from being about being a challenge to the system to becoming the system? What they realized is they couldn't convince the people of this country, so they just captured one failing institution after another. And I'm going to tell you guys a story today that runs against the advice of my campaign advisors. That's why I haven't been talking about it for the first half of this campaign. It's too complicated. You got to simplify it. Keep it simple. Dumb it down. At this point, I'm done dumbing it down because we face complicated challenges. And so I'm going to ask you to stay with me. I trust you all. I trust the people of this country to follow us through what happened. I'll take you back to the 2008 financial crisis. That's where a lot of this began. I got my first job in New York City in the fall of 2007, on the eve of the 2008 crisis. And here's what happened. Occupy Wall Street was occupying Wall Street. After the 2008 crisis and the government bailouts, led by a Republican administration, I will remind you. It's not a Republican or Democrat point I'm making. The Bush administration bailed out the biggest banks in this country. What Occupy Wall Street showed up to say was, we want to redistribute money from those wealthy corporate fat cats and give it to poor people to help poor people. Agree or not, that is what the old left had to say. But right around that time, there was the birth of this new strand of the left, the woke left, that said, you know what, the real problem in this country, it's not quite economic injustice. It's not quite inequality anymore. It's racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry and climate change. Well, guess what? If you're Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street is a pretty tough pill to swallow. But the new woke stuff is actually pretty easy. Applaud some diversity and inclusion, put some token minorities on your boards, muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change after you fly in a private jet to Davos. It's pretty good work if you can get it. But they didn't do it for free. They had a demand in return. They said, you know what, we expect the new left to look the other way, when it comes to leaving our own corporate power intact. See, that's the arranged marriage between these two unlikely bedfellows. It was not a marriage of love. It was more like mutual prostitution. And the net result of that act was the birth of this new woke industrial complex that's a sort of merger of state power and corporate power that is far more powerful than either one alone. So that's what Wall Street did. So Silicon Valley watched this very carefully, and they said, okay, that worked pretty well for them. We're going to get in on the trade, because the old version of break up big tech used to come from the left. That wasn't a right-wing slogan. That was a left-wing slogan. Break up big tech. So what did they say? Okay, wait. We can do a deal here. We will use our monopoly power to censor hate speech and misinformation as you define it. But we will not do it for free. We expect the new left to look the other way when it comes to leaving our monopoly power intact. And again, that trade worked masterfully for both sides. And so that's how you then get the rest of the economy getting in on the act. Coca-Cola making statements about new voting laws in Georgia that make it sound more like a super PAC than a soft drink manufacturer. Nike musing about slavery 250 years ago in the United States without saying a peep about using slave labor to make $250 sneakers that they sell to black kids in the inner city who can't afford to buy books for school. Right? The list goes on. That's how it spread. It works. So then you get to, it's not just corporate America. You get the other failing institutions getting in on the act too. Teachers' unions that have failed our students, failing to teach them how to do math, said, hey, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. We'll blow some woke smoke to deflect accountability for our actual failure. We might not have been teaching black and Hispanic kids and white kids and Asian kids too how to do math, but how about this? We'll just say math is racist. 2 + 2 = 4. Math is racist. What might not be racist is actually their failure to teach kids in the inner city across schools how to do math. You get to universities, 4-year college degrees. Tell people my age, you get a college degree, 4 years, take on that debt from the U.S. Department of Education, go on, live the American dream. I'll tell you what, many of my peers, you know how young people are disaffected from politics, many of my peers haven't paid off their student loan debts because they were sold a false bill of goods. But you got critical race theory to make up for it, because at least it gives them a chance to apologize for their own failures at the university level. Well, then you go to the U.S. military. What do you have? And this is really going to end up being a story about my generation and what's going on with us millennials. We see a generation spending $3 trillion from Iraq to Afghanistan, thousands upon thousands of innocent American lives sacrificed. To what end? The Taliban still in control in Afghanistan, an Iraq regime that is hostile to the United States and vulnerable to the influence of Iran. $3 trillion later, what are you going to do if you're General Mark Milley? Muse about white rage and systemic racism. It is woke smoke to deflect accountability for the fundamental failure of an institution that abandoned its true purpose. From Wall Street to Silicon Valley to K-12 education to 4-year college education to the U.S. military, that is the arranged marriage between the managerial class that is fundamentally hostile to the people who they're supposed to serve, marrying their old enemies on the left by saying that we'll do a deal, say what you want us to say, but deflect the criticism that used to come from the old left, and we are here sitting here duped to watch that play out in slow motion. That's what happened until the story took a really dark turn, when a new party showed up on a scene and turned that arranged marriage into a 3-party affair. And that is the Communist Party of China. You see, they understand this game far more deeply than any of us do. Xi Jinping realized, okay, if America's institutions, even America's greatest companies and universities, are so willing to then embrace the fringe minorities' anti-Americanism with their own country, this is an opportunity for China. How did they do it? Well, I'm going to give you some facts and let you all figure it out with me. Xi Jinping, when he is pressed about the Uyghur human rights crisis, 1 million religious minorities in Xinjiang suffering the greatest human rights atrocity committed by a major nation since the Third Reich of Germany. What does he say? He says that Black Lives Matter shows that the United States is no better. I'm not making that up. Is that an accident? No, it's not. His top diplomat comes here to the Alaska summit, faces off Tony Blinken with a 15-minute opening statement saying that China wants to see the U.S. do better on human rights, that China wants to see the U.S. stop slaughtering, that is his word, slaughtering black Americans. Now, this would be ludicrous. This would be laughable were it not for the fact that our own companies and universities, and hell, even our own military, lends credence to what he's saying. You know, Disney will object to a parental rights bill in the state of Florida or an anti-abortion law in Georgia while going to Xinjiang to film Mulan in the middle of the very province where they're committing that human rights atrocity. LeBron James will criticize his systemic racism here in the United States while bowing to his true Chinese overlords. BlackRock will apply emissions caps to Chevron and Exxon without doing a peep to PetroChina in the other side of the world. Jamie Dimon to Tim Cook will bow to their true master because Xi Jinping knows what we have failed to understand in this country. We thought we were going to send Big Macs and Happy Meals and somehow export democracy to places like China. We thought we were going to use our money to get them to be more like us. Well, they realized they could do us one better. They used their money, access to their market, to get us to be more like them. Or one step worse than that, they used our money to get us to be more like them. And it has worked. It all comes down to actually the money at the end of the day. Right? China builds a great Chinese wall that says you can't enter the Chinese market if you criticize the CCP or apply an emissions cap over there. But they will roll out the red carpet if you criticize the United States or if you apply those same constraints in America. So that's what turns Larry Fink to Tim Cook into Xi Jinping's circus monkeys. He will say jump. They will say how high. So that is how deep this rot runs. And yes, I told you, that's not a usual, not a campaign speech I'm giving you guys. We're getting to truth here. This is how we got to where we are, which we have to see with clear eyes before we get to sloganeering about the solutions. So where do we go from here? What do we do about it? We have a culture of censorship and fear that stops you from saying in public what I have just expressed to you. We have institutional leaders who have been captured from one institution in the private sector to the public, to a Chinese Communist Party that's playing us like a mandolin. Where do we move forward from here? I was at the Reagan Library, as you all know, in the middle of the week, and I'll tell you that Reagan was one of my great heroes, and he is one of my great heroes, because he did what he needed to do in his era. He cut taxes. He slashed government regulations. He did what he needed to do to unleash an era of prosperity, whose echoes we continue to enjoy to this day. That's why Reagan is my hero. But I want to recall the words, actually, of my favorite Republican of all time. That's not Ronald Reagan. That's Abraham Lincoln, who 160 years ago reminded us that the dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. And I say today, as a member of a different generation, as the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican, as the youngest president ever elected, if you all put me there, as a member of a new generation reaching the next generation, the dogmas of 1980 are inadequate to address the unique challenges that we face today. Today, the real threat to us is not even from Congress on the eve of whatever artificial shutdown debate they're having on a given hour today. That's not the real threat we face. The real threat we face in the United States is the rise of that managerial class from our universities to corporate America to the ultimate mother of the managerial class in the administrative state in the federal government itself. Today, the people who we elect to run the government, they are no longer the ones who actually run the government. It is the deep state in the shadow government of those three-letter agencies that wield power today. And that is why I have said that as your next president, I will do what the U.S. president, the leader of the executive branch, can actually do. We will shut down the unconstitutional federal administrative state. That is the head of the snake, and we're not going to tinker around the edges. We're going to gut it. If I can't work for you all as your next president for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of these civil service protections. We're done with it. When there are government agencies that should no longer exist, from the FBI to the IRS to the ATF to the CDC to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to the U.S. Department of Education, we're not going to incrementally reform them. We will get in there and shut them down. That is how you revive the integrity of a constitutional republic. 75% headcount reduction in the federal bureaucrat headcount. Rescind 50% of the unconstitutional federal regulations that fail the Supreme Court's test in West Virginia versus EPA. This is how you actually drain the swamp. And they will tell you, I respect the beginning of the project that President Trump began. That's why I commend him every time as the excellent president that he was. He rolled over that log, and we saw what crawled out. And I will always give credit to him for doing that without apology. We saw what crawled out. But if you strike the swamp strikes back. So if you're going to roll that log over and see what crawls out, you better be ready to bring the pesticide. That's what I'm bringing to the table. Okay? Extermination of the swamp. They told him. That's what they do. They dupe leaders like us. They say, oh, you can't fire these employees because of civil service protections. Well, guess what? I've actually read the law. My parents got this for me yesterday, my pocketbook copy of the Constitution. There's one Article 2 in the Constitution. If somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they do without any authority to change it. So I refuse to be the puppet who sits in the White House today. We're going to actually get in there and say, you know what? The civil service protections might say, hey, I can't fire you because I disagree with something and you're working at the FTC. Fine. But the civil service protections do not apply to mass layoffs. And mass layoffs are absolutely what I will bring to the D.C. bureaucracy as your next president. That is how you gut the system. That's what we'll do at home, and if we do one thing at home, there's a lot else I want to do. Gut the administrative state so we have 3 branches of government, not 4. What do we do abroad? Declare independence from our enemy, Communist China. That is the Declaration of Independence that the next president of the United States needs to sign. It's what Thomas Jefferson would have signed if he were alive today. Today, we depend on our enemy, Communist China, for the shoes on our feet to the phones in our pockets. If that were a Russian spy balloon flying over half this country, you want to know what we would have done? You know it. We would have shot it down in an instant and ratcheted up sanctions. But we didn't do it for China. Why? Because we're scared. Why are we scared? Because we depend on them. We depend on the goods and services they provide. We depend on our addiction to China. We're addicted to the fentanyl that they're pumping across our southern border that's going to kill 50 times the number of people who died on 9/11, dying this year of illegal fentanyl pumped over from China crossing our southern border. We're addicted to the digital fentanyl they'll put in our kids' hands in the form of modern social media. We're addicted to financial fentanyl in the form of our national debt that they will continue to fund. We have to say we are done with our addiction problem to China. We're cutting the cord, declaring independence from the climate cult that shackles the United States while leaving China untouched by drilling, fracking, burning coal, embracing nuclear energy in this country without apology. Declaring semiconductor independence from Taiwan, the chips that power those phones that are recording this in the audience today. Declare independence from that semiconductor supply chain. Declare independence from the pharmaceutical supply chain, the same country that will poison the illegal pharmaceuticals crossing our southern border. You think they're waiting around to play nice when they send you your ibuprofen to do the same thing? No, we have to have an independent pharmaceutical supply chain in this country. The F-35 fighter jets that we build in the United States depend on China. What do you think is going to happen in a, God forbid, a scenario of a conflict? We can't depend on our enemy for the military equipment that we're supposedly building up to protect ourselves against our enemy. We must declare independence from communist China, and that will take a leader with a spine. I'll level with you all. We got to be honest with you. I think we can do this. It's not as hard as they make it out to be. Onshore to the United States, reopen relationships with allies from South Korea to Japan to India to Australia. But will there be some measure of inconvenience possibly involved? I'll be honest with you. There may be some small sacrifice involved. But it's like my parents taught me. You can make a sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. And that is this thing we call the United States of America. When we're in that war, the first step to winning a war is you need to know you're in one. But we need the right general to lead us to victory in that war. And this is personal for me. We have lost our sense of national pride in the United States of America. My generation, the generation younger than me, Gen Z, 60% of us say we would sooner give up our right to vote, that's what Gen Z says, than to give up their access to TikTok. I'm not making that up. 25% recruitment deficit in the U.S. military. Why? What's going on there? We will require a leader from the next generation to actually reach the next generation. And I'll tell you what's going on with millennials and Gen Z across this country. I think it's true of all of us. It's definitely true of young Americans. We are hungry for a cause. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity. At a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, belief in God, belief in country, belief in self, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole in our hearts. And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, Zelenskyism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. Do you think it is an accident that we see the rise of these same poisons at the same time? Come on, guys, that's not a coincidence. That is a symptom of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country. And what we need now as Republicans, no, not as Republicans, as Americans, is a leader who will answer the question of actually what it even means to be an American today. I am an America First conservative. I will not apologize for that. But to put America first, we will answer what America is. That is what we're missing in this country. We have been running from something for a long time. Now is our moment to start running to something, to our vision of what it means to be a citizen of this nation. What does it mean to be an American? Means we believe in the ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. Ideals like meritocracy and the pursuit of excellence, that you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That's why we're done with affirmative action in America. We will end it. It has been a cancer on our national soul. We are done with the group quotas. What does it mean to be an American? It means we believe in the rule of law. And I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. We will use our own military to secure our own southern border without apologizing for it. What does it mean to be an American? It means the people we elect to run the government will once again be the ones who actually run the government. And yes, that will take a leader from a different generation, a leader who comes from the outside, uncaptured by the system as it exists, who is willing to speak the truth, not just when it is easy, but when it is hard. That is what this campaign is all about. Take what you will say in private, and yes, let us say it in public without apology. Speak that truth, speak it with a spine, and stand up for it. God is real. There are two genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism is the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty. There are 3 branches of government, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution, it is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is the truth. We fight for the truth. We stand up for the truth. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what reunited us after the Civil War. That is what won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is what still gives hope to the free world today. And if we can revive that dream over group identity and victimhood, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about, and that is what we will revive to save this great nation. God bless you. God bless your families. And may God bless our United States of America. Thank you.